being vulnerable means sharing everything always. And that is not the case. Vulnerability isn't about telling everyone everything all the time. It's about being honest and open in a way that's intentional and grounded in self-awareness. It is about having boundaries. Welcome to the Be Your Own Life Coach podcast, where you master your mind and coach your own comeback. You are the hero, you are the guide, and you will learn to architect your life from the inside. I'm your host, Britannia Stowe, joined by my sister and co host, Annika Wilder. Enjoy the show. What if the thing you believe is your greatest weakness is actually your greatest strength? That's how I feel about authenticity, but vulnerability is the exact same way. The willingness to show up and be seen despite emotional exposure. That's right, we're talking about vulnerability. Annika, you and I talk about this all the time that vulnerability is not weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's the gateway to connection, growth, and transformation. And I wanted to know, what do you think about vulnerability?
I love this topic because, and I love the way you said this, emotional exposure. That is the perfect explanation of what vulnerability is. And I was totally scared of vulnerability. I totally perceived it as weakness for most of my life. In fact, growing up, we would watch things that, movies that would be tear jerkers, and I would not cry. I would, even if I felt it, I would hold it in. I don't know why. And it was so bad that it was to the point where I think they said it jokingly, but dad would say things like Annika's cold-blooded or something, like she doesn't cry. And it kind of hurt my feelings, but at the same time, I was like, well, I'm tough. I'm not a crybaby, right? And and
Meanwhile,
then
your older sister is like sobbing in the corner.
well, and vulnerability doesn't have to be just about crying, right? Like it's so much more than that. But I didn't know that. I thought being vulnerable was just being willing to cry in front of people. And it wasn't until I met my husband, who my now husband, but when we were dating, he picked up right away that I was scared to be vulnerable. I was so scared to show him my inside. It's easy to be like, here's my personality, here's all the surface level things, but I didn't want him to see my heart. I couldn't even look at him in the eyes for too long because the eyes are the window of the soul. Like I would be so giddy and just like I could not make eye contact with him. And he sat me down one time and said, "I want you to sit here on this couch. I want to share this TED Talk with you." And I said, "Okay." And it was Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability. She is the queen of vulnerability. And he said in such a nice way that basically I'm scared to be vulnerable. And he helped me see after listening to that TED Talk, he said, this is something that can be a super empowering thing for women. And I want you to feel safe to be vulnerable with me. And it was sweet, and I'm so forever grateful for it. In that moment, I totally resisted it. Even though I still was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is great TED Talk. She totally makes sense for other people. This wasn't for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so that fear is real. It's so real. I mean, why are people so scared to show their emotions? Britannia, what do you think?
Oh my gosh. Well, because it is like standing naked. It honestly is. I imagine, Indiana Jones. Okay, I think it was the first Indiana Jones, late Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, where he has to go into this like cavern, and on one side is what looks like this giant threshold that he's gonna have to leap across. But he ends up taking some sand and he throws it across, and he can see, oh, it's actually a very, very thin path. And I view vulnerability being that very fine line, that very intentional path. You have you today on this side, and then on the other side is the person that you want to be. And it's right there, and there's a path right there, and all you have to do is be vulnerable to get there. But it is scary. The path is narrow, and you feel exposed. You feel exposed. And I even struggle with vulnerability today. And I've been, pretty focused on being authentic and being vulnerable in my relationships and in life. But it's scary because you feel like you're naked and you're naked in front of the people who you actually care what they think of you. It's not like social media, because I think it's easy to put stuff out and, people can like it or hate it. Who cares? But vulnerability is for closeness of relationships with your spouse and with your children and with your parents and your siblings. And these are the people that you actually care what they think of you.
So what's the difference between being open and like telling your life story? Because I'm an open book. Like I could tell people facts about me. And what's the difference between being an open book and being actually vulnerable?
Well, vulnerability takes risk. So you can be an open book because you've decided, I'm going to share this part of my story. You've already decided that I'm going to talk about maybe an abusive ex or insecurities that you've overcome. But vulnerability is more about the present and less about how you're going to showcase yourself into the world. Does that make sense?
So it seems more like it's because when you're showcasing it, if I'm just an open book, it's like the things that I'm detached from, it's almost like performing versus like just actually being present with how I'm feeling. So being
Yes.
detached versus being in your feelings.
Right. And I would even say that you can be authentic and be an open book without being vulnerable. That
Totally.
vulnerability is a missing piece if you're looking for deepened connections. A stage, say you give a big speech and you talk about, being this open book and you're telling some stories and, you're laughing and maybe crying and it's being very impactful and moving. But then you get off stage and someone comes up to you and they say, wow, I was really impressed with your speech. I would love to learn a little bit more about your abusive relationship because I'm currently in one and I would like to hear more. All of a sudden you have a choice. You can continue being this open book and just kind of rattling off, preconceived ideas of this past relationship and how you think you've come overcome, or you can really look this person in the eye and be present in the moment and feel the emotions and be present in what they're feeling. And you may have to be vulnerable to deepen that connection.
And I think some of the signs to resisting vulnerability, and I'm preaching to the like I know this because I'm scared to be vulnerable, is that I quickly respond. I quickly react. I quickly fill the spaces. So instead of allowing there to be quiet, allowing us to sit together, that's scary. It's not that I'm afraid of silence because I actually like quiet, but it's in conversation when there are feelings going on and then it's quiet. I feel like I need to like hurry fill the space because that's vulnerability. That's complete exposure is no talking and just feeling with whoever you're in the room with. That freaks me out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is scary, right? Like I said, it takes risk. So, Annika, your husband, now husband, encouraged you to be more vulnerable. You've been married to him, is it 10 years now?
Yep. Yeah,
10
we just hit our
years?
10 years. Yeah.
So, clearly you've had to learn to be vulnerable. When was the last time you were vulnerable? Can you be vulnerable with us now and share a little story?
It's something that I work on actually all the time because I think it's essential for a relationship. And Dan helps me every day. In fact, he just helped me yesterday when we are dealing with contractors or we're finishing a basement in the house we just bought. And there's a lot of issues with it. And I'm feeling upset about it, but I couldn't think of the emotion I was feeling. I thought I was just kind of numb, but I think I wasn't sitting with my feelings. And Dan just came over, gave me a hug, and said, are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling like he was trying to get me to be present with my emotions because I wasn't. I was very detached, like, well, it is what it is. We got to figure it out. And I said, I don't know. I think it's going to be fine. And that's usually where I go is positivity. And I said, it's going to be fine. It's going to work out. The basement will be done. We're going to move in. And then we talked a little bit more and he kept asking questions. And finally, it hit me. And I said, I know what I'm feeling. And he said, what? And I said, I'm feeling like it's my fault. I'm feeling guilty because I'm the one who picked these people. I'm the one that have been communicating with them all along the way. And I should have communicated better to get out in front of these issues we're having. And so and I don't want to say I'm blaming myself, but the feeling I was feeling was guilty. And we just kind of sat there and he's like, it's not your fault. It's okay. And he calmed me down. But I had to actually really sit with myself and really think about it. It was hard for me to say immediately what I was feeling. It took time because that's not something that's natural for me to pinpoint exactly what I'm feeling in the moment.
Mm. And what courage you had to have to not just express, but first get there, to allow yourself to sit and search and then communicate. That takes courage. And Brene Brown talks about that, right? In her book, Daring Greatly, she says vulnerability is courage. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And just like it takes fear to be brave, it takes vulnerability to have courage. And so if you're looking to be more courageous in your life, then maybe you also need to be more vulnerable. So, Annika, I want to commend you for being more courageous.
Thank you. And I haven't read that book yet. I want to. It's on my list, but I do have the quote that she grabbed or named the book after. It's
Mm.
by Theodore Roosevelt. I have it right here in my office, and it's kind of long, so bear with me, but it's so good and it really describes courage. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Mm. So good. I think of a gladiator. When you were saying that, I think of the courage and the vulnerability of gladiators fighting in an arena. And are we not gladiators in this modern day and age?
100%. And I think that we grow more, I like the word victory, we come out victorious when we put ourselves out there, we take a chance on ourselves and we show courage. And so what you're saying, because I know there's a lot of myths about vulnerability, and for me, I totally believed that vulnerability was weakness. So what is actually the truth that like how do we demystify the myth of vulnerability being weakness?
Well, I mean, let's just say it right here. Okay. Vulnerability is not weakness. I know that's the number one myth about vulnerability, but vulnerability is actually a sign of courage, like we've already said. And it takes strength to show up authentically and to be seen. And I really love that, to be seen, because that's why I think a lot of people struggle with vulnerability, and why they think it is weakness is because, oh, someone's going to see through the facade. They're going to see through this like beautiful, shiny exterior and all of a sudden see my imperfections and see my cracks. And I want you to know that nobody is perfect. And this idea in society that we have to put ourselves up in social media or play this role in life of perfectionism, I think can kind of confuse us. I also think one of the reasons why vulnerability is perceived as a weakness, because you'd mentioned, crying, you didn't cry because you thought, oh no, I'm tough, I don't need to cry. But that's not just all what vulnerability is. Vulnerability can actually be not crying when everyone else is crying, right? It's being authentic and emotionally exposed, even if it's different than those around you.
So, what about you? When has there been a recent time where you have been completely vulnerable and showed up courageously?
Yeah, recently it was with my spouse. So I fancy myself a boss babe. I can do it all. Take out my dogs with my baby strapped onto my chest, and people are like, "Wow, you're killing it." I'm like, "Thanks." And I work and I cook dinner, and I feel very proud that I'm just this boss babe crushing my new mom life. Well, my husband had a really busy weekend, and I usually get help from him on the weekends, but I didn't get much help at all. And that's tough for me because I have things that I want to do. I don't get a break from being a mom. And so on Sunday, I was feeling some kind of way, but I didn't feel like I could really express. I didn't feel like I could be vulnerable because my husband was stressed and tired from his long weekend. And he even asked, he said, "Why are you so quiet?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just stressed." And then he went on with his day. A few hours later, he's like, "What's going on with you? Why are you grumpy pants?" I'm like, "I'm not, just got a lot on my mind." This is an example of me not being vulnerable. And
Mhm.
I was not being vulnerable because I honestly, I didn't feel like I could deal with it. I was already dealing with so much. The emotional risk of saying, "Hey, your badass wife here is actually struggling." And I didn't want him to view me in a way that was less than, because I want him to see me as this wonderful wife and mother. And the day, wore on a little bit more. And he's like, "Listen, I don't know what's going on with you, but I can tell there's something going on." And I was like, "Okay, um, I think I'm ready to be vulnerable and tell you how I'm feeling." And he's like, "Okay, what is it?" And I could still tell that he was feeling irritated and anxious and stressed. And it took so much of my energy, even though I wasn't sure how he was going to receive it, because I could tell his fuse was already short, for me to say, "I am not feeling supported. I know that you had a busy weekend and you weren't here for me. And so I feel like I'm doing it all. I feel like I'm raising this kid by myself. I feel like that I'm taking care of the dogs by myself." And the truth is, I wasn't. He still cleaned this weekend. He still helped with the dogs, right? But I was feeling not supported. And that's where the vulnerability came in, is factually, he hadn't done necessarily anything wrong, but I didn't feel supported, and I needed to be vulnerable and tell him that, even if it didn't make sense. And
Mhm.
even if I felt like he didn't have the space to receive it. And so after I communicated that, I actually opened the floodgates and started to share some other things that were on my mind. Because once I felt like I could be vulnerable and it was well received and I could take that risk, I felt like, okay, I can be vulnerable about other things as well. And so we had a really nice conversation, and it ended up just feeling really, I don't know, there was closure. I felt like, okay, I'm okay. I am supported. And by me being vulnerable and telling my husband that I need more help, he was like, "Listen, I'm going to skip the gym on Monday. I'll take the baby as soon as I come home from work. Why don't you go take a workout class or go to the gym?" And so not only did I feel deeper in my relationship with my husband and feel supported, which is what I needed, but I also got to go do something that I love.
This is so good. This is like the common story of like every mom and wife. We take on so much. We want to try to do everything ourselves and we fail to communicate appropriately what we are feeling. And men want to protect, they want to provide, they want us happy, they want to see us smile, and they don't want us to feel unsafe to share those vulnerabilities. And this is something that I have to work on all the time, but this is a message to all women out there. It's okay to say how you're feeling. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be emotionally exposed, especially to those that you trust the most.
Hmm. That brings me to another myth. Annika, what's another myth about vulnerability?
It's that you'll lose respect. Like if I am completely exposed, if I'm sharing how I truly feel, I'm worried what people are going to think of me and may not respect me as much.
And you just, reiterated that it's actually the opposite, right? These myths are actually the opposite, right? Vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability, you actually gain respect instead of losing it.
And it's not just like I need to share my deep emotions with you. I think being vulnerable is also, it doesn't have to be so heavy. Like, for example, if someone's coming to my office and I'm in the middle of doing something, what I need to say is speak up and say, I can't talk right now. I need to finish this email. I need to finish this call. I've got things to do. I don't have time for chit chat. But I'm afraid of saying those things because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want to lose respect. I want people to trust me. But the opposite is actually true. When you say, like, I'm not available right now, I can talk to you at this time, it actually increases your respect because you're putting up boundaries. And the boundaries come from when you are emotionally exposed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My sister-in-law, I think, does this very well. Angelica, ask her, like, how are you doing? And she'll be like, oh, I'm doing okay. I'm dealing with some stresses at work. And I'm like, oh, do you want to talk about it? And she's like, actually, no, not really. And I'm always shocked by this because I feel like as women, it's like, no, 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 I asked you and you're supposed to tell me everything.
Yeah.
And she does such a good job of being vulnerable and saying, actually, I'm okay not sharing this with you or with anyone right now. And so that brings us to myth number three. Being vulnerable means sharing everything always. And that is not the case. Vulnerability isn't about telling everyone everything all the time. It's about being honest and open in a way that's intentional and grounded in self-awareness. It is about having boundaries.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a sister-in-law as well that has very healthy boundaries that often says, I'm not interested in talking about this right now. And I think it's so funny. And maybe our family's just the weirdos because we just talk about everything all the time. And I had to it took me some time to get used to people when they say like, I don't want to talk about it. And instead of pushing for them to open up, which does not breed connection, you respect it. And it's okay for them to say, I'm not ready to talk. And if you allow them to feel that way, then eventually they might share with you later and or they might not. Either way is fine.
Absolutely. And so here we have these wonderful influences in our life. I do think we attract some of that because we grew up with maybe not great boundaries. So now we have some amazing people in our life that can help teach us that. Uh, but we can learn that vulnerability and authenticity go hand in hand. And if you can be vulnerable, you can also be authentic and vice versa. I imagine this kind of like this diagram that shows that vulnerability is a gateway, right? So you still have vulnerability up at the top, and it's gateway to authenticity. You can't really be authentic without vulnerability completely. You can, but you really need vulnerability to deepen your authenticity. And you can truly be authentic without you can't truly be authentic without vulnerability because authenticity requires showing up fully, and it's not just this polished version of yourself. So then you have authenticity gives vulnerability purpose. So when you choose to be vulnerable in alignment with your values and your truth, it's not just emotional exposure, right? It's not just sharing and pouring out your heart all the time. It's meaningful and it's intentional. So then vulnerability and authenticity hold hands and they build trust. And authenticity maintains that trust. Authenticity is for the long haul. And I feel like vulnerability is for that present moment, for the here and the now. We talked about, how can you be an open book? and not have vulnerability. And you can, but you can't be truly authentic without that vulnerability. And so together they create real connection. Vulnerability invites empathy. Authenticity keeps that connection honest. When we show up vulnerably and stay authentic, we allow others to feel safe to do the same, creating deeper, more meaningful relationships.
I think this is so good because if you are trying to be somebody else, being something that you're not, it's going to be impossible to be vulnerable because you don't even know who you are, or you lose track and get out of touch with the true self. And it's so much easier to be your version of, what is it called? Like the first-rate version of yourself instead of a second-rate version of somebody else. It's easy to keep track of. Like, have you ever lied and forgot what the lie was? And then you're like, oh no, it's so hard, and it's actually easier to be yourself and to keep track of yourself and your personality and who you really are. But sometimes that means being vulnerable and exposing that to ourselves. Like, vulnerability doesn't just mean being vulnerable with others, but being vulnerable and okay with yourself as well.
This reminds me a lot of my 20s. Now, Annika, I'm going to be vulnerable and say our ages here. We're both in our 30s. And in my 20s, at least I'm in my 30s for a little bit longer. But in my 20s, I really struggled with this. And I was insecure and afraid to be vulnerable. And so I thought I was being authentic, but really I was kind of like, this is going to age me a little bit, but like a carbon copy of a carbon copy. So it is, when you have this copy and there's that like paper underneath and you write on it indents and it's that carbon paper, right? It leaves those dark marks so you can have this copy. Well, I thought that I was being authentic, but really I was taking all vulnerability out of it. And so I was just like a shell of myself, a copy of a copy of a copy of what I thought people wanted me to be. And because of that, I really struggled in my 20s. And so for our listeners, if you're in your 20s and you are feeling like an imposter or it's hard to be vulnerable, I just want you to know that it's okay, that we didn't just figure this out yesterday. This has taken, 10 years and 20 years for us to really embrace it. And I still struggle with it. So I just want to put that out there before we jump into our self-coaching segment, that there is nothing wrong with you if this feels really scary, because it is.
And I think it's just, knowledge is power. We're here to share what we have learned and what helps us. And for me, I know the power of vulnerability. I want to be more vulnerable and I work on it every day. And there's some things that are very natural to me and there's some things that aren't. And it's okay to lean into the things that aren't natural and to push yourself and to coach yourself to learn a new skill because it'll get easier with time.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, for our coaching segment, I always have some reflection questions for you. So, you can either write these down in your journal or just as I ask them right now, just give yourself a moment to think about them. What's something I have shared because I'm afraid of how I might be seen? So, something I haven't shared because I might be seen in a certain way. An example would be like your emotions to your significant other, or if you don't like something happening at work. So what's something that you've been keeping to yourself because you're afraid of how you might be exposed? Another reflection question: what's a moment where I could be honest, but usually choose to protect myself? And those can go hand in hand. I know in certain relationships in my past, especially with my mom in my 20s, I would often protect myself and wasn't always honest. And another question that I encourage you to reflect on: am I ready to take the risk and be more vulnerable with someone in my life? And I'd like to take that and make it a challenge. So maybe there's just a tiny truth that you could share with someone you trust. Now, I encourage you to choose someone you trust because vulnerability does take risk. It is like standing naked in front of the mirror, in front of this person. And so maybe there is a way that you can be honest, as simple as saying, I'm feeling, insecure today, but I showed up anyway at a party or at a social gathering. Or maybe you need to ask for help. And, sometimes we skip this step of saying, I'm scared to ask for help. We say it inside, and then finally we muster up the courage and we just go ask for help. Well, what if instead of just asking for help, what if you told the person that you're asking that you're scared to ask for help? Just that little layer of vulnerability. And another one would be maybe I'm telling someone close to you that I'm just working on trying to be more honest with myself. Annika, are there any other tiny truths that we could help encourage our listeners?
Well, something that came to my mind, there's two things. I had a friend who would lie all the time, but they knew they lied all the time. Like it was a weird habit that they formed and they were working on it. And it was actually kind of comical, but I respected them for this. They would lie and then a second later they'd say, "I'm sorry, that was a lie." And they would fess up to it and I was like, "Okay." And like I'm working on this. I don't know why I have this bad habit of lying, but they just said it in the moment and it's okay. We talk about this in my relationship all the time. Like say you say the wrong thing and you said the wrong thing because it didn't land well, they got offended or you hurt their feelings or whatever, and you can say, "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. Let me try again." That takes courage to admit that and to try again. That shows vulnerability and it also shows you're willing to connect with that person in a way that they can receive it better.
Oh, absolutely. I know I have done that. Usually it's not in the moment because I don't know why, but later I'm like, I shouldn't have said that. And, it takes courage to even go back, a day or two later, be like, so you probably haven't been thinking about this thing that I randomly said 2 days ago, but I have. And I just would like to tell you, I'm sorry that I said this, XYZ. And you'd be surprised how well being vulnerable is received.
I agree. And I think it's it's hard still because like we have like this hard exterior, this protection, right? And we just want to protect ourselves, which is totally human behavior that is natural. But the more that we have this hard exterior, this armor, this shell, any kind of protective layers, it prevents people from reaching your heart.
It's funny you talk about this protective layer because I have this visualization exercise about armor. We all have this armor, and some of us may not realize that we have this armor, right? And we don't always know what it looks like or how it got there. So I think it would be really, really great. And I've done this several times, and I could probably do it again, honestly. When you get home, stand in front of a mirror with your clothes on or naked, it's up to you, but just stand in front of the mirror and imagine yourself wearing invisible armor. It can be made up of anything you want. It could be aluminum foil, glass, steel, flowers, whatever it is. You have this armor. Ask yourself, what is it made of? Really visualize, contextualize it. This armor was built over time and it was built to protect you from rejection, protect you from judgment, shame, hurt, or even failure. Now, with armor, it has pieces, right? So take the piece off your shoulder and ask yourself, what is this? What is this piece of armor? Name it. Maybe it is the fear of being judged. And so as you take it off your shoulder, say, I am taking off the fear of being judged and set that down. Maybe you have a chest plate on. And as you take that off, you say, this is the habit of pretending I'm okay when I'm not. And you set that down. And you start to take off these pieces. For me, it's, taking off a layer of my armor of, accepting that I'm not perfect and that's okay and setting that down. And soon you'll notice not only does this help you visualize this protection that you've, put on, but you'll feel lighter as you take off layer by layer. And then I want you to look at yourself, look at your reflection, And notice that you are strong without this armor weighing you down. You are softer, but you are stronger. You're braver. And I want you to say to yourself, even without this armor, I am still safe. I am still worthy, and I am still enough. This has been another episode of the Be Your Own Life Coach podcast. If you found value in today's conversation, subscribe and share the love. And remember the teachings of Lao Tzu. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Until next time, trust yourself. Take the wisdom, take the breath, and take the next step.